I think we got to start though in Austin, Texas, which coming into the day, that was the biggest game of the day. And how rare is it in college football where the biggest game of the day actually turns out to be the biggest game of the day? So many things happened. Jack?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, nobody was more right than us for sure.
Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts on this game, and I'm sure we'll get into all of them. But I mean, Alabama and the players doing horns down, the fans. I was with Travi. I knew immediately what they were going to say. Every Nick Saban team that's won a national championship has had a tough road game.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So here's that deal. Because I told them last week, I was like, y'all just assume Alabama's going to kill everybody. You just assume that because it's Alabama on the jersey. Well, guess what? They don't do that. And they got out there and they struggled. Now, what's weird about this, several things to talk about, including Quinn Ewers in a second. What's weird about this is it's the most undisciplined Nick Saban team we've ever seen. 15 penalties for 100 yards. And then after your 1-point victory, you're throwing horns down. You say a lot of things about Saban, man, but he's usually buttoned down. He's usually got that thing humming. It's a machine. You don't see a lot of emotion. Like that's not the Alabama I'm used to, Casey Smith.
Yeah, no, I mean, and not only having 15 penalties, I believe all 15 penalties were in 3 quarters too, which I mean, regardless is still crazy. But the way that Alabama kept themselves in that game closely, because there were so many different things that Texas did that didn't work, or like that, it should have been a safety. I've watched that play over and over and over of Bryce Young getting sacked in the end zone. Like that should have been a safety. Little things like that. There were definitely missed calls, whatever. But overall, I mean, it was like Nick Saban had zero control over this team. But what's so baffling to me is just last week, you know, Jack, you mentioned this. Like he has talked about how much he loves this team, like everything about this team. He's like glowing over, saying it was a rebuilding year last year and just everything about it. How do you go into week 2 with a team that you love so much? That's the most undisciplined team he's ever had at Alabama. That doesn't check out to me. That doesn't make sense.
I would imagine week 3 and week 4, Alabama is going to look starkly different because I just can't imagine a Nick Saban team repeating those mistakes. I come Monday, come tomorrow, I bet the practices at Alabama are going to be very, very interesting this week. But
even so, I mean, he had to have been pissed in the locker room at halftime, which everybody says, like, how much would you pay for a Nick Saban halftime locker room camera when they're losing or when it's close? I would pay a lot of money. But even for all of that was happening, I know it was an emotional win and obviously a last minute field goal and what Alabama had to do to even get into that position. But the fact that he's going out to the middle of the field to talk to Jenny Taft, talk to the sideline reporter, and he has to then say, don't do that shit with the horns down. He has to like verbally say it enough where he usually, can just shoot a player a look and they like quiver. Like that to me says there's a lot more going on right now. Maybe not. Maybe it's just overreacting to it, but like, he didn't have control.
From Texas' side, there's nothing fluky about what happened today. They were right there in yardage with Alabama, 376, I think, to like 350. It was very, very even. Alabama had 16 first downs. Texas had 25. Like Texas was there step for step. There was never a separation between the two teams, and that was with Quinn Ewers, who, by the way, looked absolutely fantastic. And then he gets hurt. Did you roll your eyes or are you just looking up?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I have your game right in front of me. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
No rolling my eyes.
Okay. Quinn Ewers was great.
Yeah.
Then Hudson Card comes in. Hudson Card's not great, but the defense played well. Texas looked like a functional, good football team and played the best team in the country. Let me stop that. Played the best program in the country to a damn near draw. But they are the best program in the country because they can always wriggle off the hook. Bryce Young with an incredible play in the last drive after they fall down 19-17. Bryce Young drives them down the field. He's getting sacked. He ducks under it. He runs to the 17. They win the game. But a phenomenal statement for Texas, even though they didn't win the game. And I know people say, hey, we don't do moral victories or whatever. Yeah, I think you probably do because you were losing to Kansas this time last year. Now you're going toe to toe with Nick Saban's ass.
Yeah, and I want to hear what Jack has to say, because Jack was actually the only one. And I know, Brandon, you said that you thought they would keep it within the number. Jack was like getting closer and closer to saying that he thought Texas may win the game, which was obviously a very realistic possibility. But the last thing that I want to say about Bryce Young before we get to the Texas side of things, you just mentioned it, that minute 29 that they had left on the clock and he drove the ball down to get them into field goal range. That to me was very much like, hey, this is why I won a Heisman Trophy. He had, granted the whole game didn't look that way, but like there are not a lot of quarterbacks in college that you have that confidence in. And as soon as you knew they had a minute and a half left, like I didn't think Alabama was going to for sure win, but there was definitely like a huge thing in my mind that was like, no, they're going to get within field goal range.
I think the highest compliment you can pay a player is one that we pay to Bryce Young right now. When they got the ball down 2 with a minute left, I knew they were going to win the game. Like that's just he was going to do something. He was going to be special, or at least like you said, the only way they're going to lose games is if they miss the field goal that he puts them in position for.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen with Alabama moving forward, but I do know that, like, say they go into the SEC and they get their shit together and they start beating everybody, whatever, like that could be a moment that you look back on. And the same thing with Joe Burrow in 2019, when you look at how LSU beat Texas then, like you could look at it and say, yeah, they didn't play a great game. Texas played a really, really good game. But Bryce Young was the reason that they were in the position when they needed to be in a vacuum with a minute 30 left.
I think today will be remembered forever. And now this was more about Texas than it was Alabama, because early in the season last year, Alabama went down to Florida. They won 31-29. That was an awful Florida team. They got their coach fired. They won by 2 points. Like, they do have this game every now and then. So Alabama's going to be fine. Like, Alabama's still Alabama. They're gonna go 11-1, 12-0. They're gonna be in the SEC championship game. They're gonna be in the playoff. I have no doubt about that. But Texas just stood toe to toe with a monster. And Katie, I know you and Jack have probably looked. I personally haven't heard on Quinn Ewers. I heard 2 weeks, perhaps.
I heard broken collarbone, and then I had a Viceroy.
I think broken collarbone was like in the immediate moments afterward where people were speculating. I don't think that ever came out like from an official reputable source. Jack, you got anything on that?
No, I would assume they probably will get. He probably got X-rays tonight. They'll talk about it tomorrow.
I see it.
You guys sprain. I would say the biggest thing about this game, in my opinion, was Alabama got incredibly lucky. There's really no other way to paint it. The safety situation was incredibly lucky. Texas missed a 20-yard field goal. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of questionable pass interference calls in the first half in the back of the end zone on 3rd and goal when Quinn Ewers was still in, on a drive that Quinn Ewers threw an amazing pass to Xavier Worthy. What are the chances that Xavier Worthy drops that ball again? That's another one that's just a situation where, like, they had 2 coin flips there and they landed on Alabama's side. And then they also barely beat a backup quarterback for Texas, who isn't the greatest backup quarterback in the world. Who isn't the worst backup quarterback in the world, because a lot of teams would love to have Hudson Card on their team, but he was playing on one leg.
Yeah. And he's not Quinn.
And Alabama barely beat them.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, there was the pass interference call you mentioned in the left corner of the end zone. In Alabama's final drive, there was a holding call that was kind of ignored there, so Alabama could. But I always love it when national media, national people can watch an Alabama game closely that involves a non-SEC team and be like, "Oh wow, questionable calls going in Alabama's way. Questionable calls. Yeah, that's called playing in the SEC every goddamn year of my life." They got the best coaches, the best players, the best everything in the world, but they still get the most help from the officials. It's the craziest thing in fucking football that it happens.
I said this was a great introductory kind of a what do they call it when you go to school early as a freshman? Orientation for Texas in the SEC, because it was an introduction of what every other SEC team has dealt with officials for the past however many years. And
they've got better players than you, and they're still going to get the calls. You just have to get used to it.
It always confuses me whenever you do hear the national media say that, because it's like, it's so egregious so many times how would you not know that is? Like, it's almost like they have to say that, like they feel like they have to be like, oh, like I can't believe this is happening. It's like everyone knows it's happening. Everybody knows these cards fall that way. But I think that, and credit to Texas, because you're right. I think this says way more about Texas than Alabama. Alabama will be fine. But the fact is like, Casey Thompson had to transfer because Hudson Card won the job last year. And him being a backup speaks to how good Quinn Ewers is. So we know that. So like, that's great that Texas has him available. I think that, like, if you're a Texas fan, I don't believe in moral victories, but I kind of do in this situation. Like, I feel like I'm being hypocritical because not only, I can sit here and fully admit, like, I thought Alabama was going to kick the shit out of them. The line, I think, closed at 20.5. Like, this was not a game that was just fluky that ended up being close. Texas should have won that game, not just because of bad calls, not just because of different situations with a backup quarterback. So I think you do look at that and you say, okay, we're going into the SEC in the next couple of years, and we're hanging with the number one team in the country already. I don't know if you can continue to do that or not, but if I'm a Texas fan, I'm definitely like having a whole bunch of confidence, especially because of what happened elsewhere in the country throughout the day.
Well, listen, I said back in March, I said Texas is going to get blown out by Alabama in week 2, and that'll be the last game they lose all year. And I was saying it for the shock value. I was saying it to put it out there, and I was saying it because I kind of believed it. And now I kind of believe it a lot. Like, Texas, if they can get Ewers back, if Hudson Card can hold this thing where it needs to be, and they get Ewers back in the next 3 or 4 weeks before the schedule really ramps up on them, they're going to be a tough out in the Big 12, man. They're going to be a tough out. You got Overshown on that defense. You've got some talented transfers on that defense. I mean, they help Bryce Young. And I'll tell you another thing about Alabama. Jahmyr Gibbs I don't think he's to the level of the running backs they've had over the last 10, 15 years. I think he's fine. I
love Jack's reaction. I don't know what Jack's.
Oh, I thought he was. I mean,
I think he's pretty good. I just don't think he's
Bryce Young was this.
And I don't, and this is a bigger deal. I certainly don't think their receiver group is near where it's been over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's the bigger deal.
Yeah, I would say Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, he had 74 yards receiving, 22 yards on the ground. Definitely not. I mean, Chase McClellan was obviously he had the long run, but he was the main running back. But Jahmyr Gibbs, I thought, looked outside of Bryce Young. He was the best player on the field today for Alabama. Will Anderson had his moments, but he also had his bozo moments. There was times that it was like, Will, I get that you're the best player in the league, but that doesn't mean you can just like do whatever you want. He had an absolutely like brain dead personal foul, and I think it was the second quarter or whatnot. But a guy that I don't even know where he was today was Jermaine Burton. Like, why did you leave Georgia? If you're gonna, like, if I was a Georgia fan, I'd be like, the grass isn't always greener, dude. You just won a national championship and you left.
Yeah. For what? Right. For what? To disappear in an offense. Yeah, it's only week 2, but we have to overreact to it.
We know for what. It was to go catch balls from Bryce Young instead of Stetson Bennett, and that might not have.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, we know the reason, but if you're not going to do it. And I think that, another thing with Texas is that we talked a lot about this, and not just us, just anybody that was breaking down this game was, can this defense, who has not been great over the last few years, and, we like to make fun of the Big 12 defenses, which obviously is a narrative that, is kind of gone right now as it is. But I mean, that defense stepped up in so many different ways. And it was like, that makes the Heisman Trophy winner and this super powerful offense not look great at times. And then on the flip side, Texas offensive line, they stood where they needed to. And like, just everything that they were questioned about going into this game, they stood the test. They lost, but they still stood the test.
Last year, they had a culture problem where he was dealing with idiots and he was dealing with players not playing hard. I think so far, 2 games through year 2, you can tell the culture has changed dramatically at Texas, in my opinion. So we're going to move off that game. But one more question about it.
For that, I think it's maybe for Jack. I think he's the only one who saw the full game. Is this more into like wrapping up, clarifying? Would we say this is more Alabama fault for like underwhelming versus Texas being better, or is it like a meet in the middle?
I think it's Texas. I think, like I said, I think everything about today was about Texas.
I agree.
And now Alabama certainly didn't play their best game, and they've shown to do that before. But if you ask a lot of people, if you asked 100 people 2 weeks ago, is Alabama's best game required to beat Texas? I think they would have said no.
I would have said no, and I'll let Jack finish it because he'll have way less of an unbiased, or he'll have an unbiased opinion. I will say, and it pains me to say, but coming from where I was going into this game, it says way more about Texas and how much better they are and how impressive they were today than Alabama. And that's not something I would just throw out there unless I meant it.
Jack.
I saw an incredibly vulnerable Alabama team today with an offense that looked borderline lost at times against a defense that is not very good. Alabama, I know it's hard to take out things, but outside of a run from Jace McClellan, which was I forgot the guy's name, the middle linebacker on Texas. If he read it right, he would have stopped him. Outside of that, there was no explosion from Alabama. Bryce Young had to go, for lack of a cringier word, sicko mode to make sure that they won the game. And it wasn't throwing the ball. All the big plays that he made were on the ground. I'm concerned about Alabama out from the point that we thought they were untouchable.
To that end, their road games aren't that easy. They got to go to Arkansas, and Arkansas is buttoned up as a program too. Like, they're not going to make a lot of mistakes. They got to go to Tennessee. Tennessee's going to score points. They got some road games that are going to be trippy. And if LSU can get their shit together, they got to go to LSU. One last thing. Texas is unranked. Alabama was number 1. Texas lost the game. Is Texas ranked on Monday? Almost certainly, yes?
Yes, and I think they would have been regardless of anything else, especially now with all the different things that happened today and all the different pieces that have fallen. Absolutely.
Speaking of the
Georgia will be 1.
I don't know about that. We'll see. I think it'll be a tight decision. But
they should be.
Maybe. Hold on. Georgia was 50-point favorites and won by 33. They were fine. They did everything they needed to do. So let's put that conversation to the side for a minute, because we got a lot of conversations to have. Let's move on from that game. One more take from that game to put it to the rest of college football. And this is a question to you guys. So far through the first 2 weeks, remember last week you had Ohio State, who everybody thought was one of the 2 best teams in the country. They struggled against Notre Dame. Well, we see what Notre Dame is. Alabama.
Only drink 1 tea today.
Alabama struggles with Florida, with Texas today. Is the gap between the elites and everybody else not as wide as we thought it was?
That's what I took away from Alabama's performance. I tweeted out from the account, I think it was when you guys were live, but I was like Alabama looks ... beatable.
And Ohio State looked beatable last week. One little stat to throw at you. I believe 8 unranked teams played ranked teams today. All 8 unranked teams covered the spread. That's just weird.
There was a Barstool Sportsbook graphic that came out that was what you're saying, but it was especially to see the top 10 spreads that weren't covered and just all the red. And it was just what it said to me. And I think to answer your question, it is early. So it's week 2. And I know we said it a little bit after week 1, and maybe it's wishful thinking from a chaos standpoint, but this has 2007 season written all over it to me, because you can sit here and you can say, okay, we think Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, whoever it is, should be ranked where they are. But then doing college football math, which I know people don't like to do, but even through 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, if you want to count week 0, but who's counting week 0 at this point? Because Nebraska is just garbage. But it's you can't really pick out and be like, okay, these are the teams that have proven that they are the best in the country, other than Alabama barely winning today.
Well, I think Georgia and Michigan are the 2 teams that have each time they've gone out, yes, they have played the way they're supposed to play. Now, Michigan might be able to throw that away because their non-conference is so fucking garbage and cowardly. Georgia and Michigan, though, are the 2 teams that have really, really, really handled business without any hiccups whatsoever.
And you can't take it away from Michigan. I mean, yes, they're not.
I think you can. I think you can just put it incomplete on them. Their non-conference is shameful.
It is shameful, and it's going to continue to be shameful. But then you look at Georgia and just how they just absolutely killed Oregon, and it's like, okay, well, how good really is Oregon? But I think that to answer your question, I think the gap looks like it's a lot closer. I think it's also just setting us up for so much chaos not just because of what's happening at the very top, just what's happening everywhere and where those things are getting set up.